Hi, Chance. Thank you so much for having me back on the show. I had a great time last time, and I'm really happy to be reading today from an excerpt from my novel in progress and also my thesis. And welcome everyone who's tuning in. So, my name is Aaraf, and this is the opening excerpt from my work in progress book called The Great Will of the Universe. The Great Will of the Universe, Chapter 1. I should preface the story with an apology to all young gentlemen out there possessing the name Will, on the off chance they were misled by the title to believe that our hero is a similarly named fellow with some grand part to play in the story of the collective human experience that is, the universe. No, the hero, or heroine to be more precise, of our story is a small, seemingly inconsequential girl by the name of Asha Snapdragon. Her hair, coming in at just barely shoulder length and of glistening ebony, was accessorized with a single hairpin that she had always associated with herself. Although, of course, grown-ups never fully appreciated this. It was funny to her how much grown-ups never appreciated. A 14-year-old girl does not simply choose a skull print hairpin without having some clue as to the statement she's making. It seemed a galactically agreed fact that there were 3 tiers of weird in the town of Andrus. I say galactically instead of universally, because it wasn't all that well known of a town, and weird because the town was, well, weird. Both these facts suited Asha just fine, thanks. She believed she belonged in that topmost tier of weird, not with the kids who'd been raised nice and proper and made a hobby out of collecting books or stamps or coins, or different kinds of origami paper, or even fireflies. Most certainly not with the tier above, which collected dragon horns, or eggs, or voodoo dolls, or outright fairies. All of which are controversies for another time. No, Asha collected wills, as in last will and testament offs. She'd realized at an early age that this was something she would always be judged for, after of course being prosecuted for, and so she kept it a secret close to her chest from all but one person. Grim Jr. was perhaps Andrus's most infamous resident, son to the Grim Reaper himself, 2-time bronze medalist at the annual Andrus High School Science Fair, and, well, not much else, truth be told. He was very good at playing checkers, though. Junior was a little tired of the whole son to the Grim Reaper thing being his defining trait, and so he dressed as much unlike his father as he possibly could. Today he had decked himself out in a white and gold robe, with absolutely no hood. He was his own man, okay? He didn't live by his father's rules or anybody else's. And that job he'd taken in the family business as gravedigger of all the universe was just a temporary gig. It was good resume-building experience, and the perks were great. His father may not have been paying him, but he was providing him free housing. Grim Jr. had first undertaken, pun fully intended, this temporary gig of his 962 years ago now. Whenever somebody pointed out that this time period far exceeded the rational definition of temporary, he would always say that it had only been a quarter of his life so far. Nobody had the heart or the resolve to work out and point out to him that the period had stopped being a quarter of his age and started leaning more towards half of his age about 380 years ago now. This is all fascinating trivia, I'm sure, but the point I'm really trying to make is that in that short period of time he had gotten to know a lot of people. None had touched his life in the way Asha Snapdragon had. So when Asha came skipping into the graveyard to see him, he immediately dropped what he was doing. "Grim," Asha said, excitedly. "What have you got for me today?" "Well, not much, to be frank," he said, grinning weakly. He then began to tug on his beard, force of habit. It helped him think. Funny thing about the act of thinking. It takes you down so many roads, in so many directions all at once, that it's hard to remember which station your train of thought had left from, and which airport it had sailed into. In this particular instance, Junior felt a bulb flicker in his head as he watched his friend. Asha was skipping around the graveyard and inspecting the tombstones. And then, while she was inspecting and humming and twiddling her bony fingers, the bulb in his mind flashed so suddenly it blinded him for a moment. Turns out, he realized, his force of habit had included not only the beard-scratching thing, but also the "not much, to be frank" line, too. There was much today, to be frank. Very, very much. "Wait, Asha!" he cried, making her jump. The young girl turned around to face him. "Hmm?" "There is something I have for you today," he said, grinning toothily and almost leaping with joy. "I've been meaning to tell you since last night when Dad broke the news. Are you ready, Asha? Are you ready? Are you? Are you?" "Hey, slow down there, Grim." She smiled weakly and raised both hands in surrender. "What's going on?" "No, just wait, say." He stopped grinning all of a sudden. "You mind if I give you your birthday present early this year?" "You've never gotten me a birthday present before." "Yes, well, early this year then?" "My birthday was 7 months ago." Early next year. Doesn't matter. So, I have big news." "Yes." She tilted her head forward, half smiling to humor him and half exasperated because oh my god she hated when he did the suspense thing. "You've made that abundantly clear. What's going on?" Junior took a deep breath. He could barely contain himself, but he wanted to make every second of waning anticipation currently etched on his best friend's face count. And then, finally, he blurted out the best news he had gotten from his father in a long, long time. "There's been an extreme extinction level event," he said, spreading his arms wide dramatically. Asha gulped. "Yep, that means exactly what you think it does. An entire galaxy full of people is dead." It took a second for Asha to register this news, and then slowly but surely her lips too began to curl into a smile. That's wonderful," she exclaimed. "So all those wills—" "Totally up for grabs," her friend boasted. "Not a soul to claim them. Figuratively speaking, of course. I don't know if Dad's been around to sign up all those dead souls for afterlife yet." There was a sudden gust of wind, and Asha found herself surrounded by a cascade of autumn leaves. She didn't flinch. Rather, she closed her eyes peacefully and craned her head upwards so that it was facing the sky. She spread her arms wide to her side, taking it all in, embracing the majestic coolness of the moment. The tiny hairs on her arms stood up on end, and she felt just the tiniest of tickles across her skin. And then she smiled. This was it. This was her moment. She would soon be the greatest collector of wills this side of the universe. An extreme extinction level event, she thought to herself. Never in her life had she expected she would live to bear witness to something that beautiful, that poetic. What, not poetic? Some of you chaps in your world think that's not poetic? Well, I can't fault you, I suppose, but Asha certainly could. See, there was a reason she loved wills. Asha believed that the will was the human's greatest invention. Sheer will informed their decision to have children, and it was through sheer will that children could be born. It was through sheer will that these children would show up their classmates and carve out their own identities and move out one day and make something of themselves. Why should death be any different? When they had something so beautiful powering their every living decision, why should that same will be left forgotten in the afterlife? There's something just deeply sad and yet beautiful about scouring through people's last words about who mattered most and what they were leaving behind to the ones they loved. It was their final act of defiance against the rules of the universe. They would, in a sense, live on through what they bequeathed. They would help you start up that business they'd always promised to be around for, or watch over you from the mantelpiece, or fill a library of tales from the past generation for you and your children to dig through and learn from. And they would do all of this and more from beyond the grave. Now, if that wasn't poetry, she didn't know what was. She opened her eyes. The sky had caught fire. Yep, glowing, pulsing waves of red and violet were dancing amidst the stars in a brilliant display of power. At the core of the fiery ballet was a white star, glowing and then intermittently not glowing. And as Asha's eyes adjusted to the violent spasms of curious shapes and colors forming in the otherwise midnight blue sky, she felt her jaw drop. The cool breeze around her suddenly dissipated in favor of hot, humid vapor. A sea of red enveloped the sky. Bright, crimson stars blinked and vanished, dead, and yet somehow the liveliest thing in the universe for light years to come. Okay, cool. So I'm going to skip ahead to a later chapter now. This takes place not too long later, and it's from the point of view of Grimm Jr. In this chapter, Grimm Jr. has just returned to the place where he grew up and where his father, Grim Reaper Sr., works. And he's here to look for information about the inventor of death, Thanatos. Because he's curious for reasons I don't want to spoil just yet. But hopefully you'll enjoy this. High above the galaxies and in the farthest reaches of space-time rests the home of the Celestial Council. There is no name worthy of this place, though mortals have certainly tried. There was Olympus, and there was Asgard. There was the Spire, the Citadel, and the Pantheon. Despite mortal efforts, the citizens of this place laugh upon those names. Here, amidst its warm clouds and gold platforms, its grand arches and architecture, and its evergreen gardens and eternal sun, the citizens know this place not by name but by association. Zeus, Odin, and Osiris call it home. Once upon a time, Grimm Jr. called it home too, but it would be an understatement to say that that time had long passed. It may be more fitting for him to refer to it now as away in football team terms. Only there are no football teams in home. There is only the Council. These were the first words Grimm Jr. saw when he stepped out of the All portal, emblazoned in massive gold lettering over the threshold. He was greeted at the station by a pair of armored guards, who saluted him in silence as he stumbled past them. Massive gold torches lit with gold fire illuminated the way down the all-portal station corridor and into the Celestial Council offices. Here, Junior came upon a towering entrance hall of marble walls and lush bonsai. Hundreds of employees were here. They were constantly filing in and out of elevators, crystal doors, and, occasionally, thin air. The way they moved, it was difficult to tell them apart. In a blur of efficiency, they glided across the lobby floor as if scarlet carpet and koi pond were alike beneath their feet. It was a bit of a shame how little attention the koi pond got, especially since the koi within were immortal and, consequently, very bored. Memories of many a bring your son to work day flashed in Junior's mind, but there would be time to reminisce later. Right now, he needed to see the archives held by his former teacher. He pushed his way past the crowds and over to reception. "Oh my godson Geo, is that you, Grimm Jr.?" The receptionist lady had always liked him, and he her. She had a kindly, sage-green face and spotless white hair, traits he was happy to see she'd retained in the past something 100 years. "Good morning, ma'am. Or night, or, sunset. Sorry, just came in from a different time zone, and you know how it is over here. Eternal sun and all. I'm here for Athena's archives." "Oh, are you sure about that, dear? Lady Athena's very busy, and, well, you two didn't exactly leave on the best of terms." "I don't need to see her, ma'am," said Grimm Jr. "Just the archives. It's urgent. Grim Reaper business." The receptionist's eyes lit up, and she looked him up and down playfully. "Well then, I'd have to see the Reaper himself now, wouldn't I? Perhaps your old man could put in the request, if it's so urgent." In response, Junior materialized his shovel in his right hand and held it up to show her. When she saw the red enchantments bound around it, she let her jaw drop ever so slightly. And then she changed her tone. "Oh, well, of course, right away," she said, reaching into her desk's drawers. "I'll get that pass out for you right away." After acquiring the pass, Grimm Jr. piled into the building's elevators alongside a dozen others, and rode his way up towards the 509th floor. On the ride up, he gazed out the elevator glass. It looked out onto a bright, magnificent vista of gardens and gold towers scattered across the kingdom. Crystal-clear waterfalls gushed off the tops of buildings and into rushing rivers below. Along the river banks, he could spy gatherings of all sorts. Picnics, barbecues, strikes by workers' unions, and so on. These strikes were being held not for higher pay or better working conditions, as employees of the council already got high pay and excellent working conditions. These strikes were for their right to strike, something both encouraged and smiled upon by the council. To most visitors, this place might look like a paradise. To Grimm Jr., who had lived in the midst of this bustle only to be constantly trampled out and left behind by it, It looked like a nightmare. It looked like a world colder than that of mortals and deader than Andros. 509th floor, the elevator announced in a friendly female voice. Grim Jr. looked around to ensure no one else was getting off here, and then nodded to take his leave. He remembered the halls of this place quite well. He glided his way down the marble and past lines of exquisite paintings and idols, all built in the honor of Athena. He was not here to see his former teacher in the main office, however. Grim Jr. was here for the first door to the right, Athena's archives. We have encountered 2 libraries of varying sizes in this tale so far. To explain why Athena's archives are so special, I must now stress where those 2 libraries are lacking. The first was Grimm Sr.'s private collection, in his own home. But the books here are largely centered around one topic. Grimm Sr.'s idea of light and heavy reading are one and the same. He likes to read about death, darkness, and occasionally dieting. The second was Sidwin Craze's library in Andros High. This might be thought of as a more traditional library as most readers might be familiar with. Mrs. Craze has, indeed, curated an excellent collection of texts and resources from across all fields and genres. However, even the greatest librarians do not have access to the repository of universal knowledge that is, the canon. Only in Athena's archives can one seek this knowledge, any answer to any answerable question ever answered in the history of answerkind. Grim Jr. had only been here once before. There were no books here. There was nothing here, in this tiny circular chamber, save for a single computer console in its center. All light in the room came from that single console. It emanated a blue, otherworldly glow all around its surroundings. Junior approached it with some hesitation and reached out a hand to touch it. There was a low, multitonal beep, and then the archives came to life. Thousands of words, symbols, and images propped up as holograms out of the console's edges and began to rush through the room. Junior looked around, awestruck, and gripped his shovel tight. The archives need not be told of what you seek. It was astounding how familiar that deep, grizzled voice sounded, even all these centuries later. Nor do we care if you speak. Come to us with your heart set, and we will tell you all the world forgets. The emblems began to combine now, and fuse together into a 3-dimensional image of a man in a ragged cloak. He had a skeletal face, much like Junior and Grim Sr. before him, and wore silver-plated armor beneath his rags. The cloak was a dirty green in color and billowed magnificently behind him. Lower down, his legs were covered like those of a scarecrow's, in a skirt resembling something of a mix between thorns and hay. In his hands, this man held neither scythe nor sword. He held a single yellow flower, a snapdragon. Thanks so much for listening.